Hi everyone, and welcome back to a supplemental video for the Basic Bible Study course. In this section, I'll just be giving an example of how to use the methods and tools you learned in the previous section on biblical poetry by working through Psalm 1. Now for this example, I'm going to use a combination of my own translation and the New International Version to try to stay close to the form that the author used and more clearly demonstrate the parallelism while still bringing out the meaning of the imagery a little bit clearer. As I mentioned in earlier sections, a formal equivalent translation is more helpful to see things such as parallelism, but it is always a good idea to compare both formal and functional translations. So I'm going to try to cheat a little bit and get the best of both worlds in this example. So the text we're going to work with is, "Blessed is the man who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, and in the way of sinners he does not stand, and in the seat of mockers he does not sit. But in the law of the Lord is his delight, and in his law he meditates day and night. He is like a tree planted by streams of water, which its fruit it yields in season, and whose leaf does not wither, and all which he does prospers. Not so the wicked. They are like chaff the wind blows away. Therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish." So now let's work through it more slowly and try to notate the parallelism and understand the imagery. It starts by pronouncing a blessing. Blessed is the man. And then it describes this person with 3 lines that are in parallel. Who does not walk in the counsel of the wicked, or stand in the way of sinners, or sit in the seat of mockers. And notice the parallel terms in each of these lines. He does not walk, he does not stand, he does not sit. These seem to be a progression. They get closer and closer to their lifestyle with each move. Then also notice, in the counsel, in the way, and in the seat are parallel terms, as well as of the wicked, of sinners, and of mockers. And all of these lines, they're repeating the same general truth. But like I mentioned, they seem to be moving forward and reinforcing with each repetition. The man gets more and more involved in the way of those opposed to God with each step. And those who are not like this man are blessed. And this contrast is brought out even more in the next verse. It says, "The blessed person has his delight in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night." Notice that these 2 lines are parallel by saying the same thing in different ways. And certain terms in the lines are clearly parallel. The law of the Lord goes with his law. And his delight goes with he meditates. Well, what does it mean to delight in God's law? Well, the parallelism tells us it means to meditate on it, to think about it, to study it, to chew on it mentally and apply it. Imagine someone says, "I love God's word, I delight in it." And you ask them, "Well, how often do you read it?" If they say, "Well, I don't read it, I don't think about it," you would probably question if they truly delighted in it. Now let's zoom out and notice that verse 1 is parallel with verse 2. And they're contrasting by giving 2 sides of the same coin, by stating the opposites. Here's what the blessed man does not do, and here is what he does. The 2 of these together describe the one who is blessed. And notice the parallel. He does not walk in the counsel of the wicked and does not stand in the way of sinners. He does not sit in the seat of mockers. Then you might expect it to say something like, but he walks in the counsel of the righteous and stands in the way of upright people and sits in the seat of the wise. But the author doesn't go there. Or rather, he kind of goes there, but he does it by a different route. He equates the way of the righteous with delighting in, meditating on, and by implication, obedience to God's revelation. The way of wickedness is always in opposition to God's revealed truth. And the way of righteousness is always in conformity to God's revealed truth. Do you see how the author has emphasized this by putting these ideas in contrasting parallelism? Now let's move on to the next verse. The author compares the blessed person to a tree. Notice this is symbolic language. So we'll need to think about the characteristics of trees and the similarities and differences. But before we go there, notice the author clarifies this is a specific kind of tree. A tree that is planted by a reliable water source. Think about a tree with guaranteed water as contrasted with a tree in a desert drought. This tree will be healthy and fruitful as opposed to being dried up and at risk of dying because it has a source of nourishment and life. So the author is saying that the one who delights in God's word is like the tree that has a reliable source of nourishment and life. And then the author goes on to describe this tree with 3 parallel lines. And all 3 state similar truths, telling how this tree experiences the blessing and therefore is fruitful. There are parallel terms. Its fruit, whose leaves, and all that he does. And they all produce life in parallel terms. It yields fruit, its leaves do not wither, and all he does prospers. Now, notice the first 2 lines are still in the symbolic language of a tree, and then the 3rd line kind of speaks more literally of the prosperity of the Blessed One. But all 3 together speak of the blessedness and productivity of this person by comparing to a fruitful tree with a steady life source. Then in verse 4, it changes gears. It starts with, not so the wicked. And I hope you see that this is very clearly a contrast. The Blessed One was compared to a tree, but now the wicked one is compared to chaff. And chaff is another example of imagery. So we need to understand the symbol. Chaff is not a common term today, but it was in ancient Israel. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with farming, and I don't know if you've ever seen a wheat plant or other grains close up, but they have a long stem, which is actually not edible by humans, but is topped with seeds, which are edible. In the farming of their day, they would cut down the entire plant, then they would crush it so that the parts would separate. Then they would take all of these things together up to a windy place, and what they would do is they would throw it up in the air. The heavy grains would fall back down to the ground, and the lighter stems, the chaff, would blow away with the wind. In other words, the chaff was thrown away because it was not wanted, because it was useless. And the wicked person is compared to this. And notice the parallelism of the larger structure. Blessed is the man is contrasted with not so the wicked. The wicked is not blessed. And like a tree planted is contrasted with like chaff, which is blown away. A fruitful, productive tree is compared to chaff, which is like garbage thrown away. That is the contrast between the blessed one and the wicked one. Then is the 5th verse. It says, therefore the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the assembly of the righteous. And these 2 parallel lines are echoing a similar truth, and the individual terms are parallel. The wicked matches sinners, and in the judgment matches in the assembly of the righteous. Notice also that the phrase, they will not stand, echoes the word stand that we saw back in verse 1. Says the righteous do not stand in the way of sinners, but now in verse 5, the sinners will not stand in the assembly of the righteous. There's a bit of a wordplay. You see, sometimes Christians can be tempted towards compromise because we can be pressured to feel that we're on the outside looking in. All the cool kids, they're having so much fun with all their sin. But God says we can't do that, so we feel left out of all of the fun. Well, we need to realize that this is misinformation. That kind of fun is temporary at best and very harmful in the long term. And the psalm right here says there will soon come a time when those who are faithful to God will be on the inside, having infinite fun in the assembly of the righteous. And those who reject God will be on the outside. Those who are faithful to God's word and his standard are the real cool kids. We are the real insiders, even though it may not always seem like it. But it is true because God said it was true. And we have this guarantee because of what we see in verse 6 next. The Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. These are two parallel statements that say the opposite. These are two opposite possibilities, two opposite destinies at the end of the two different lifestyles. And God is the guarantee that these will come about. Notice the parallel terms. The term way is parallel in both statements, and of the righteous is opposite to of the wicked. And God knows is parallel with perish. Now, when I first started to study this, I asked, are these parallel? If so, how is God knows parallel with perish? But think about it. The opposite of perishing is to be known by God. Jesus said in Matthew 7:23, "Depart from me, you evildoers, I never knew you." And I would not have picked up on this if I did not slow down and look carefully at the parallelism. Now let's try to summarize the big picture based on the parallelism. There is a contrast between the blessed one and the wicked one. The blessed one is described by what he does not do, contrasted with what he does. He does not join with the lifestyle of the wicked, but he fills his life with God's revelation. And he's compared to a tree planted by water, which is fruitful and blessed and prosperous. But the wicked one, by contrast, is compared to chaff blown away. And the wicked one is judged and excluded. And finally, the psalm is summarized with reference to God's judgment and the destinies of the two lifestyles, being known by God or perishing. Now, there's much more that we could discuss about Psalm 1, but I hope you see how valuable careful reading of poetry can be when you pay attention to the parallelism and imagery. And I hope that you're encouraged to try this for yourself. Now, in the next section, we're going to look at the New Testament genre of epistles. Thanks for watching.